The vastness of space stretched endlessly before them, an infinite black canvas dotted with distant stars. On the bridge of the lone human warship, the Resolute, the hum of machinery and the soft flicker of status lights filled the air. The crew sat in a tense silence, their attention fixed on the glowing display screens showing something that defied belief. Their sensors had detected an incoming fleet, an armada unlike anything they had ever seen. One ship the size of theirs against 100,000. It wasn't a fair fight. It wasn't even a fight anyone would call winnable. The Azankath, a race of technologically advanced conquerors, had set their sights on the outer human colonies. This fleet, massive and seemingly unstoppable, was en route to wipe out everything in its path. The colonies were unaware, unprepared. No reinforcements could come in time. It was just the Resolute, floating alone in the quiet dark, standing between the enemy and the millions of lives beyond. Captain Mira Caldwell, sitting in her command chair, stared at the tactical readout. Every instinct told her to run, to get out of there and report to Central Command. But there wasn't time for that. The fleet was too close, too fast. If they didn't act, the colonies would be overrun. The crew looked to her for guidance, their eyes betraying a mixture of fear and determination. Captain Caldwell knew that the odds were impossible, but humanity had never been one to back down from a fight. If they could just buy some time, slow the alien fleet down, maybe the colonies would have a chance. Running wasn't an option. They had to fight. Somehow. The alien fleet was a monstrous sight, a seemingly endless mass of sleek, dark ships that cut through space with precision. Each vessel in the armada was a perfect blend of function and terrifying aesthetics, designed to intimidate and overwhelm. The Azankath were a cold, calculating race. Conquerors. Their ships moved as one, a flawless formation with each craft positioned for maximum efficiency and firepower. The Azankath had never been challenged, not truly. They expanded across galaxies with ease, consuming everything in their path. They believed their technological superiority made them invincible. The Resolute was nothing in comparison. A single warship designed for reconnaissance and quick-strike missions, it wasn't built to take on a fleet. Certainly not one this size. But it was fast, nimble, and had a crew that knew how to push its capabilities to the limit. Inside the ship, the crew of 30 moved with practiced precision. Each person knew their role. Each person knew what was at stake. Engineer Vega paced nervously in the engine room, reviewing the ship's systems for what felt like the 100th time. He wasn't sure how long the ship would hold up in an actual firefight, but he wasn't about to let it fall apart on his watch. Meanwhile, First Officer Chen stood at the captain's side, his face grim as he analyzed the data pouring in from the long-range sensors. "They outnumber us 10,000 to 1, Chen said, not needing to add the obvious conclusion that their chances were next to zero. "We're not equipped for this." Captain Caldwell nodded, her eyes still fixed on the tactical display. "I know, but running won't save us. We have to do something. The colonies are defenseless. They won't even see this coming." A silence fell over the bridge as the crew considered their options. There weren't many. The Resolute could run, but they'd be caught eventually. The alien fleet was too fast, and even if they got away, the colonies would be lost. Fighting head-on was suicide. They didn't have the firepower for a straight battle. "Maybe we don't need to fight them head-on," said Vega, his voice cutting through the tension. All eyes turned to him. He stepped forward, excitement in his voice. "The Azankath rely on their technology. They're predictable. If we can disrupt their communications, cause some chaos in their ranks, they might turn on each other. Confusion could be our weapon." Captain Caldwell leaned forward, considering the idea. It was a long shot, but it was better than doing nothing. She glanced at Chen, who was already running the numbers. "It's risky," Chen said, "but it could work. If we can break their formation, get them to fire on each other, we might buy enough time for the colonies to prepare a defense." Caldwell stood, her decision made. "We're not running. We take the fight to them. Let's see how they handle a little chaos." The bridge came to life as the crew sprang into action. Plans were being drawn up. Weapons systems were being prepared, and the ship moved silently toward the massive fleet. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about sending a message. The Resolute might be outnumbered, but humanity wasn't outmatched. They had faced extinction before and survived, and today they were ready to make the Azenkath realize one simple truth: humanity never backs down. As the ship moved closer to the alien armada, the sheer scale of the enemy became even more apparent. The Resolute was like a single grain of sand against a tidal wave. But Captain Caldwell felt a surge of determination rise within her. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for everything humanity stood for. They wouldn't win by strength. They would win by being smarter, by exploiting the weaknesses in the enemy's overwhelming force. Their plan would hinge on several phases. First, they would disrupt the fleet's communication networks, using advanced EMP bursts to cripple their coordination. Without communication, the fleet's perfect formation would start to break down. The Azenkath were known for their rigidity. Take that away, and they would falter. Then, using cloaking devices and decoys, the Resolute would create the illusion of a larger force. The Azenkath would hesitate, unsure of what they were truly up against. Confusion would spread, and that would be the moment to strike. It was a plan built on deception, speed, and the hope that the enemy's arrogance would blind them to the threat a single human ship could pose. "We have one shot at this," Caldwell said, her voice calm but firm as she addressed the crew. "We hit them fast, hit them hard, and we don't stop until we've made sure they know who we are. Let's show them what it means to face humanity." With those words, the crew steeled themselves for what was to come. They were one ship against 100,000, but they carried the weight of humanity's defiance in their hearts. The Azenkath had never faced an enemy like this before, and now they were about to learn that you never underestimate a cornered human. As the Resolute drew closer to the alien fleet, the reality of what they were about to do settled over the crew. It wasn't just the staggering odds they faced, it was the knowledge that every action had to be precise, every calculation perfect. There would be no second chances. If they were to survive, they had to outthink the Azenkath at every turn. Captain Caldwell stood on the bridge, reviewing the final details of their plan. The key to their strategy was speed and deception. The Azenkath, for all their technological superiority, relied on predictable, calculated maneuvers. Their fleet formations were perfect, almost machine-like in their precision. They moved with clockwork efficiency, their strength lying in their collective unity. That was exactly what the Resolute would aim to disrupt. The first phase of the plan involved crippling the fleet's communications. Without the ability to coordinate, the ships in the Azenkath fleet would start to lose their cohesion. Caldwell knew that while the Azenkath were powerful, they were also creatures of habit, overly dependent on their technology. By using a series of targeted EMP bursts, the Resolute could fry their communication systems, forcing the fleet into disarray. Engineer Vega had been working around the clock to prepare the ship's EMP generators. While the Resolute wasn't originally outfitted for large-scale electronic warfare, Vega had modified the systems to push their capabilities to the limit. It was risky. Overloading the generators could cause a meltdown in their power core, but there was no other option. "I've rerouted power to boost the EMP range," Vega explained, his voice filled with both confidence and anxiety. "We can hit multiple ships at once, but it'll be a one-shot deal. After that, we're going to need to book it out of there before they recover." Caldwell nodded. "That's all we need. One shot to cause chaos." Phase 2 of the plan involved creating the illusion of a larger human force. The Resolute was equipped with advanced cloaking technology, making it invisible to the Azenkath sensors. But cloaking alone wouldn't be enough to make the enemy hesitate. They needed to make the fleet believe that a far greater force was lurking in the darkness. For this, they would deploy a series of decoy drones, programmed to emit false signals that mimicked the energy signatures of multiple warships. If it worked, the Azenkath would see what they thought was an entire human battle group closing in on them. "We'll scatter the decoys around their flanks first," Officer Chen explained, pointing to the tactical map. "Once we hit them with the EMP, they'll scramble. The decoys will make them think they're surrounded. That's when we hit them with Phase 3. Phase 3 was where things got dangerous. The plan was to disable key ships in the fleet by boarding them and planting explosives in critical systems. It was a high-risk maneuver that required a small team from the Resolute to physically infiltrate the alien ships. The boarding party would be made up of highly trained specialists, including Vega, who insisted on being part of the mission despite his technical role. "I'm the only one who knows the modifications we've made to the explosives," Vega argued when Caldwell initially refused his request. "I'll be fast, and I know exactly where to place the charges. This is the only way to guarantee we hit them hard enough." Reluctantly, Caldwell agreed, knowing full well that any misstep during the boarding mission could doom them all. The success of the operation rested on their ability to pull off these 3 phases without a hitch, and there was little room for error. The crew prepared for what lay ahead, each member focusing on their role in the mission. The tension was palpable as they ran through final checks and last-minute preparations. In the ship's armory, the boarding team suited up in reinforced combat gear, each of them fully aware of the stakes. They had trained for this kind of mission, but none of them had ever faced odds like these before. Captain Caldwell addressed the crew over the ship's intercom, her voice steady but carrying the weight of the moment. "This is it, people. We've faced impossible odds before, and we've come out on top. Today's no different. We might be outnumbered, but we've got something the Azenkath don't. We've got the element of surprise. We've got the will to fight for our survival. And we've got each other. Stick to the plan. Trust your training, and we'll show them what humans are capable of." The plan was set in motion. The Resolute moved into position, its engines humming quietly as the ship drifted closer to the Azenkath fleet. The alien ships were massive, dwarfing the Resolute in both size and firepower. But they were unaware of the human vessel lurking in the shadows. The cloaking system held, and as they neared the edge of the fleet, Vega activated the EMP generator, firing EMP in 3, 2, 1. Vega's voice was tense as his hands flew across the console. A pulse of energy rippled out from the Resolute, spreading rapidly through the vacuum of space. The first few Azenkath ships shuddered as their systems went dark, their sleek forms momentarily illuminated by the burst. In an instant, chaos erupted across the fleet. Ships veered off course, their formations collapsing as confusion spread through the ranks. Without centralized communication, the Azenkath vessels struggled to maintain their perfect precision. Phase 1 was a success. Immediately, the Resolute deployed its decoy drones. The small, nimble devices zipped into position around the Azenkath fleet, each one transmitting false signals that mimicked human battlecruisers. The Azenkath, already disoriented from the EMP, now faced what appeared to be a massive human force closing in on them. Their hesitation was palpable, and for the first time, the fleet faltered. Captain Caldwell watched as the tactical display lit up with false targets. The plan was working. The Azenkath were buying the ruse. "They're diverting ships to engage the decoys," Chen reported, his eyes scanning the data feed. "We've got an opening." Caldwell didn't hesitate. "Boarding team, you're clear. Hit those targets and get out fast." The boarding team launched from the Resolute in small, agile shuttles, each one cloaked and equipped with magnetic clamps to attach to the enemy ships. They approached their targets with precision, moving in under the cover of confusion. Vega, leading one of the teams, felt his heart race as the alien hull loomed larger in the shuttle's viewport. They docked without incident, the magnetic clamps securing them to the side of the Azenkath vessel. Vega's team moved quickly, cutting through the ship's outer hull with laser torches. Once inside, they slipped into the dark corridors of the alien ship, navigating their way toward the critical systems they had identified earlier. It was eerily quiet inside the ship. The Azenkath crew, still recovering from the chaos of the EMP, had no idea that humans were inside their ship. Vega's team moved with practiced efficiency, placing the charges in key locations throughout the ship's engine room and communication hubs. They worked in silence, each member hyper-aware that any sound could alert the enemy to their presence. As they placed the final charge, Vega checked his timer. They had 10 minutes to get out before the explosives detonated. "Let's move," he whispered, and the team began their silent retreat toward the shuttle. The tension was unbearable as they made their way back, every creak of the ship's hull sounding like a potential disaster. But they reached the shuttle undetected and launched just as the first wave of explosions rocked the Azenketh ship. Phase 3 was complete. The explosions that rocked the Azenketh ship sent shockwaves through the fleet. From the bridge of the Resolute, Captain Caldwell watched as chaos spread among the alien vessels. The once perfect formation of the enemy ships was now splintered. Several of the larger ships had gone dark, their engines crippled and their systems offline. The precise mechanical coordination that had been the Azenketh's strength was now unraveling, and confusion rippled through the fleet. On board the alien vessels, the aftermath of the boarding party's sabotage was clear. Fires raged within the alien command ships, and the explosions had severed key systems, sending their crews into disarray. Communication breakdowns meant that orders couldn't be relayed quickly, and without centralized control, the fleet was forced to react on instinct. The disciplined, mechanical precision of the Azenketh was gone, replaced by frantic attempts to regain control. Phase 3 successful, Vega's voice crackled over the comms, barely concealing his exhaustion. He and his team had made it back to the Resolute just in time. "We've hit them where it hurts, but they're not down yet." Caldwell acknowledged the report, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. The fleet was still enormous, even in disarray. While their internal communication systems were crippled, their firepower remained intact, and now that the initial confusion was fading, the Azenketh were beginning to regroup. The decoys had done their job, but the aliens were starting to recognize the ruse. "We don't have much time before they adapt," Chen warned, his voice calm but urgent. "They're already forming new attack patterns. They'll start sweeping for us soon." Caldwell nodded. They had known from the start that this wouldn't be enough to destroy the fleet outright. Their goal had been to buy time and perhaps deal enough of a blow to send the Azenketh reeling. But now, with the fleet starting to regroup, they had to make a final move before the window of opportunity closed. "All hands, prepare for evasive maneuvers," she ordered. "We're going to hit them again, and this time we're going straight for the heart." The heart of the fleet was the Azenketh flagship, a massive armored behemoth that served as the command center for the entire armada. If they could take out the flagship, it would deliver a crippling blow to the enemy's command structure. Without the flagship, the fleet would lose its leadership, and the chance for an organized counterattack would vanish. But reaching the flagship was easier said than done. The ship was surrounded by layers of escort vessels, each one heavily armed and ready to defend their leader. Even in the midst of the chaos, the flagship remained well guarded. "We'll have to get in close," Chen said, studying the tactical map. "Too close for comfort." Caldwell grimaced. "We won't survive a direct assault on that thing, but if we can slip past the escorts, we might have a chance to hit it where it's vulnerable." The plan was desperate, but there was no other option. They had pushed the Azenketh fleet to the brink, but unless they landed a decisive blow, the tide could turn against them at any moment. "Vega, can we divert enough power to the cloaking device to get us through their perimeter undetected?" Caldwell asked, already thinking ahead. "I can do it, but we'll be running on fumes after that," Vega replied. "We'll lose shields, weapons, everything. We'll be a sitting duck once the cloak drops." "That's a risk we'll have to take," Caldwell said firmly. "If we can't get to the flagship, we're finished anyway." Vega got to work, rerouting power and pushing the ship's systems to their limits. The energy required to maintain their cloak and slip past the enemy would leave them vulnerable, but it was the only way. As the Resolute moved closer to the flagship, the tension on board the human ship was palpable. Every member of the crew knew that this was a one-way mission. If they succeeded, they might disable the enemy fleet. If they failed, there would be no coming back. Even Caldwell, as calm as she appeared, felt the weight of the decision bearing down on her. The ship slipped through the defensive perimeter of the Azenketh fleet, the cloaking device holding as they passed dangerously close to the enemy escorts. The enemy ships were too focused on reorganizing to notice the Resolute, and for a moment it seemed as though the plan might actually work. But then, without warning, a proximity alarm blared across the bridge. "We've been detected," Chen said grimly, his hands flying across the console to assess the situation. "One of their patrols must have picked up an energy spike. They're locking onto us." Caldwell's heart pounded as she saw the flashing indicators on the display. The Azenkath ships were beginning to converge on their position, weapons systems powering up. They had only moments before the fleet would open fire. "Cut the cloak," Caldwell ordered. "Divert all remaining power to engines. We're going for it." The cloak dropped, and the Resolute surged forward at full speed, racing toward the flagship. The enemy ships around them opened fire, brilliant beams of energy lighting up the darkness of space. The Resolute's shields, already weakened from the power diversion, flickered as they absorbed the incoming fire. The ship shook violently, alarms blaring as systems overloaded. "We're taking heavy damage," Vega shouted from the engine room. "I'm rerouting what I can, but we can't take much more of this." Caldwell's hands gripped the armrests of her chair as the ship rocked again from another hit. They were so close to the flagship now, its massive form looming ahead of them, but the incoming fire was relentless. If they didn't act soon, they would be torn apart. "Target their command center," she ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We only need one shot." Chen worked furiously at his console, locking onto the vulnerable section of the flagship. The enemy ship's defenses were formidable, but the boarding party's sabotage had weakened them. There was a gap in the armor, exposed by the earlier explosions. "I've got a lock," Chen said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Firing torpedoes. The Resolute's torpedoes launched from the ship's battered hull, streaking toward the flagship. Time seemed to slow as the crew watched the weapons hurtle through space, the seconds ticking by in agonizing silence. Then the torpedoes struck. The explosion was immense, tearing through the flagship's command center in a brilliant flash of light. The alien vessel shuddered, its once impenetrable form now fractured. Secondary explosions rippled across its surface, and within moments the massive ship began to drift, its systems offline, its command structure obliterated. The Azenkath fleet faltered. Without the flagship's leadership, the coordination that had made them so deadly was gone. The smaller ships hesitated, their movements becoming erratic as they struggled to adapt to the sudden loss of command. Some began retreating, while others fired blindly, unsure of where the next threat would come from. On board the Resolute, there was no time for celebration. The ship was heavily damaged, and the crew was barely holding things together. Vega's voice crackled over the comms, grim but resolute. "We're not going to make it out of here intact." Caldwell nodded, her expression determined. "We've done our part. Now we just need to survive long enough to get out of here." With the Azenkath fleet in chaos, there was a chance, just a small one, that they could escape. But the damage to the Resolute was severe, and their systems were failing. Still, the crew had fought through impossible odds before. They weren't about to give up now. "Set course for the nearest jump point," Caldwell ordered, her voice calm in the face of the storm. "Let's get out of here." The Resolute sped away from the heart of the battle, her engines straining as the crew fought to keep the ship in one piece. Behind them, the Azenkath fleet was in shambles, still reeling from the destruction of their flagship. But the danger was far from over. Even with their command structure shattered, the alien ships that remained were powerful, and they were regrouping for a final assault. The damage to the Resolute was catastrophic. Systems were failing, and the ship's once strong shields were now barely holding against the onslaught. Vega's voice crackled over the comms from the engine room, tense but focused. "We've lost the primary reactor cooling system. I've rerouted power to the secondary systems, but it's not going to hold much longer." Captain Caldwell gripped the edge of her command chair, her mind racing. They had inflicted a devastating blow on the Azenkath fleet, but now the crew's survival hung in the balance. She could see the damage reports scrolling across the screen: engines overheating, weapons offline, life support systems beginning to fail. They were barely holding together, and with the enemy ships closing in, they needed a miracle to make it out alive. "We're not going to survive another direct hit," Chen said quietly, his fingers dancing over the controls as he tried to keep them one step ahead of the pursuing ships. They're getting closer. They've recalibrated their sensors, and they're tracking us now. The tactical display showed the remaining Azenkath vessels converging on their position, faster and more numerous than the Resolute could ever hope to outrun. The crew had pushed the ship to its limits, and they all knew that the final moments were approaching. Caldwell stood, her mind made up. "We have one last move left," she said, her voice steady. "If we can't escape, then we make sure they remember us. We take out as many of them as we can." The crew exchanged silent glances, their faces grim but resolute. They had always known this mission might end this way. From the moment they decided to face the overwhelming odds, they had accepted that sacrifice might be the only path to victory. "We still have enough power in the secondary reactor to initiate a core overload," Vega reported, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "If we set the core to detonate, it'll take out anything within a few hundred kilometers." Caldwell nodded. "Then that's what we do. We're not letting them leave here unscathed. If this is the end, we take them down with us." The bridge fell silent as the weight of her words settled over the crew. They knew what she was asking. It wasn't just a fight to the end, it was a final stand, a decision to go out on their terms. No retreat, no surrender. It was the essence of what had driven humanity forward for centuries: defiance in the face of certain death, and the refusal to be conquered. "Vega, initiate the core overload," Caldwell ordered. "Chen, plot a course straight into the heart of their formation. We're going to ram them." Chen's hands moved swiftly over the controls, locking in the coordinates. The Resolute was heading straight for the largest cluster of Azenkath ships. Vega's voice echoed through the ship as he worked in the engine room, setting the core to overload. Overload initiated. "We have 10 minutes before detonation," Vega confirmed. "It's irreversible." Caldwell stood at the center of the bridge, looking out at the vast darkness of space, where the looming alien ships were drawing closer. Her crew, though exhausted and battered, remained at their posts, ready to see this mission through to the end. She had led them through the impossible, and now they were about to make history. "This is it," Caldwell said quietly, her voice carrying a tone of both finality and pride. "We've done what we came here to do. The colonies will have time to prepare, and the Azenkath will never forget what one human ship can do." The ship surged forward, its engines straining as it powered toward the heart of the Azenkath fleet. The alien ships, realizing the human vessel's intent, scrambled to avoid the incoming collision. Energy blasts from the enemy vessels rained down on the Resolute, shaking the ship violently, but the crew held firm. They had accepted their fate. "We're almost there," Chen reported, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. 5 minutes until impact." Caldwell took a deep breath, glancing around at her crew. "You've all done humanity proud. Whatever happens next, know that we've made a difference. They'll tell our story for generations." The final moments stretched out, each second feeling like an eternity as the ship hurtled toward its target. The Azenkath vessels, desperate to avoid the incoming human warship, began to break formation, but it was too late. The Resolute was closing in, and the core overload countdown ticked toward 0. In the final minute, Vega's voice came through the comms one last time. "It's been an honor, Captain." "The honor is ours," Caldwell replied, her voice steady. "We go down fighting." The collision was both spectacular and devastating. The Resolute slammed into the nearest alien vessel with an impact that shook the stars. At the same moment, the overloaded core reached its critical point, and a massive explosion erupted from the heart of the human ship. The blast expanded outward in a brilliant wave of destruction, consuming the alien ships in its path. The energy from the explosion ripped through the enemy formation, tearing apart vessels, shattering armor, and sending shockwaves across the battlefield. In those final moments, the Azenkath fleet was decimated, their forces broken by the explosion and the loss of their command structure. The surviving ships, disoriented and leaderless, began to retreat. The once invincible fleet was now scattered, a shell of its former strength. The crew of the Resolute was gone, but their sacrifice had not been in vain. They had faced an impossible enemy and delivered a crippling blow. Their final act of defiance had saved the human colonies, giving them the time they needed to prepare for the next phase of the war. And though they would not live to see the future they had fought for, the legacy of the Resolute and its crew would live on. Across the stars, word would spread of the lone human ship that had stood against an armada, of the courage and resilience that defined humanity. The Azenkith would remember the name of the Resolute, and they would never again underestimate what a single human ship could do. In the end, it wasn't just a battle. It was a message that humanity, no matter the odds, would always fight back, and that when one ship flies toward 100,000, you better run.